to pursue individual responsibility, and that is individual criminal responsibility, and that is a big deal. That is, that is one of the sort of revolutionary aspects of the ICC, or of this body of international criminal law. International law is a law of states, and the International Court of Justice has been around for a very, very long time. But that's about, this state A sues state B, and state B is held responsible. And so what does that mean? They have to vacate a certain plot of land, or they have to give, compensation, or whatever. But the point is, it's about state responsibility. No, the International Criminal Court is about the criminal responsibility of individuals. And that is quite revolutionary in international law. And it is a big deal. I don't want, I don't want people to get too cynical about this, at least the principle, because, baddies they are afraid of this. Bad people are afraid of this. I don't know how to put it. Israeli political leaders and military leaders, I assure you, wake up in the middle of the night screaming and sweating at the prospect of being held responsible. I don't know that for a fact, but it certainly is how we've seen that with dictators and baddies all over the world. They know they're doing bad things, and they are afraid of being hauled to a court of law to be held responsible. Whether this seems like a realistic prospect to any of them is something, that's a case-by-case thing, but it's definitely something which is in their minds. And it's something which, as it becomes a more and more realistic possibility, it's something which can affect change. So the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, we see I have it all on the slide. So the violations would have to take place in the territory of a state party, or the accused are nationals of a state party, regardless of the place, or the case is referred by the Security Council to the International Criminal Court. Obviously, the third is never going to happen for obvious reasons in the case of Palestine. But as we'll see, basically the state of Palestine, after being recognized as a state in the United Nations, they became state party to the ICC, meaning that violations that took place in the territory of the state of Palestine that can be and were referred to the ICC. So that's how this all started. The big thing, of course, with the ICC, and apologies if you all, if everybody knows this, but the big thing with the ICC and with all these international tribunals is that it operates under the principle of complementariness. I'm not even sure that's an English word, but it's complementary to national legal systems, i.e., so in the case of Palestine, if the state of Israel were to, systematically arrest soldiers that killed Palestinians for no reason, or systematically arrested political leaders that advanced the colonization of Palestine, and put them, if they were to take these obligations seriously and to put them under trial, and throw them in prison, or to punish them accordingly, appropriately, at an appropriate level, then none of this would really come into play. But as we have seen, and as is, blatantly obvious, clearly obvious, the state of Israel has not done that up till now. They're not going to do it. There's no indication whatsoever that they are going to do this in any kind of serious way. So it's, in a way, it's a perfect fit for what the ICC is supposed to do. You have a state, the state of Israel is a very wealthy state, and they can, if they want, if they were interested in doing so, they could very easily, uphold the rule of law and make sure that, none of this happened, and arrest soldiers and all these kind of things. But they're not unable to do this. They're perfectly able, but they're unwilling. And this is where it's a little bit different, I would say, from some of the other cases that the ICC and some of the international tribunals have looked at. The state would have to be unwilling or unable to bring perpetrators to justice. In the case of Israel, it's not that they're unable, but they're unwilling. And that's very, very clear. they have these kind of show trials every now and then, and everything exists on paper. You have all these very sort of sophisticated looking legal systems on paper. And every now and then they sort of pretend that they're trying to set the wheels in motion and all that, in a sort of effort to reduce international pressure. But really, nothing comes of it. I mean, the cases where Israeli soldiers have been held accountable for any kind of violation are really almost zero, and the same with colonial settlers as well. So it really is a case that the International Criminal Court really must look at. Now, the ICC decided to, and I have this long timeline which I'll show you. They finally made the decision, or announced that the investigation was opening. This was 3rd of March on 2021. And as indicative examples, illustrative examples, the prosecutor said that they were looking in particular at these 3 cases or issues. So you have the defensive edge 2014 in Gaza, the shooting of protesters, so again, the Great March of Return, and the policy of colonization, the settlement policy. Again, these are illustrative only. They just sort of put that in their statement saying these are the 3 main things that we're looking at. But certainly there are 3, already you have 3 very stark examples of clear and obvious war crimes that the state of Israel has been doing. Israel, of course, is not cooperating. The United States is putting as much pressure as it can on the court to drag its feet and basically not do anything. I mean, it's announced that it doesn't accept this investigation. It's not going to cooperate with it, and it's just, it's trying to shield Israel. Now, at the same time, of course, the U.S. is, still a very, very powerful country. It's the most powerful country in the world, certainly militarily and economically. And, it has these strings that it can pull. But one of the very nice things about international law that we have now is that the United States, not being a state party to the ICC, actually has fewer options to stop this. The U.S., of course, it's a member of the UN and all the UN agencies, and it can and has, for example, with UNESCO, it has, threatened to and actually pulled out of particular agencies. What this means is that, the big proportion of the budget of that UN agency that the US had been footing, it disappeared because we're just going to take our money and we're not going to give it to you anymore. And this is a very potent threat for UN agencies. But that's something they can't do. They can't do this for the ICC because they're not state party. They aren't giving any money. They're not giving any money. So they can't say, well, we're going to take our money and go elsewhere because they're not giving money anyway. That's not to say that they don't have, strings to pull. And of course, Japan is the biggest sole donor to the ICC. And Japan is very, very mindful always of what the US wants it to do. The Europeans are all member state parties to the ICC. So again, they also have, they're also susceptible in many different ways to US pressure and also to their own sort of domestic constituencies that in many countries are pro-Israel. So it's not, this political pressure is definitely taking place, but it's just not, it's not that the US just puts its foot down and stops this. It's not something that they can do. So in that way, it is very interesting to look at. Now, one thing that I put at the bottom, I started off with showing the maps, the usual maps, which you're all very familiar with. One thing that's very disappointing to me is that the ICC decision or the ICC investigation is looking at only 67. It's not looking at what takes place in 48. I personally am not so thrilled about that, but I do think still that what's happening with the ICC moving forward, inshallah, it's something. It's not perfect. It's not 100%. I wish it could be 100%, but it's better than nothing for sure. We can argue that, I think one could argue that, the ICC only looking at 67 is essentially sort of accepting the state of Israel as legitimate within 48. And I would certainly argue that as well. If it were up to me, the ICC would be looking at the whole place. But unfortunately, it's not up to me. And even just these 3 illustrative violations are they're big deals. I mean, defensive edge, we're looking at, military orders to attack civilians and attack civilian objects, or even, if not even that, even to attack military objects which would bring about disproportionate loss of civilian life. And that was a very these were clear defining factors of what was going on with defensive edge. So these are clear violations of the laws of war. The shooting of the hundreds of protesters and the Great March of Return, again, very clear. There's no bones about this. I mean, there's no, not even hiding it. I mean, the Israelis announced that, according to their rules of engagement, they were doing the right thing. What are we doing wrong? These people are trying to invade us by coming across the border, and so we're just shooting at them. So nothing wrong there. Really just boggles the mind how they can just sort of announce these things and get away with it. At a certain point, they did allegedly change the rules of engagement, and things it came down a little bit. But still, we're looking at very clear examples, not of very low-ranking soldiers sort of going off the reservation and doing things without permission. No, this was very, very clear. I mean, they were given permission by officers and high-ranking officers in the military to shoot at civilians that were not posing any serious threat. So again, very, very clear examples of violations. And thirdly, the colonization policy. The Israelis have an argument which they trot out about this, about trying to argue that it's not a violation of international law. But it's just it's so ridiculous. I don't even bother anybody with it. I mean, it's complete nonsense. What's going on is clearly a war crime. There's no question about this. And like I said, every single Israeli government, and if we're only looking at 67, every single Israeli government since 67 has advanced the colonization of Palestinian land openly. This is not something that just sort of like happens and they're hiding it, or it is very, very open. And now, with the new nation-state law that was adopted in 2018, I think it might have been 2019, but the new sort of nation-state law, but the basic law that the Israelis have adopted, they again announced that Jewish settlement of the land of, quote, the land of Israel is a fundamental value of the Israeli state. You can't get much more blatant than this. So even supposing with the first two, even supposing the Israelis come out with, briefs that are hundreds and hundreds of pages long about the measures that they have taken and they are taking to hold soldiers to account. I mean, it will all be, none of it will be true, but it will, it's, what I'm saying is it's possible to come up with, it's conceivable to come up with sort of justifications or, to weasel your way out of this. But with the colonization policy, there's no way. There's just no way. I mean, every single government has advanced this openly as a policy of the state of Israel, and there's no way that the court can get out of this. They now that they've announced that they're looking at this, they can't possibly get out of this without going forward and indicting political leaders. Certainly not with any kind of way of legitimacy. Now I'm sort of closing up, but just at the end, and I'm not telling anybody here, I think, anything that you don't know already, but I compiled this timeline just to show the blatant double standards. Again, this is not to get people cynical and depressed again, but just to show how long it's taken with Palestine. Over 6 years, we're still waiting for indictments. We don't know, we don't know what's happening. All they've only said that they're, investigating. Whereas with Ukraine, 4 days literally after the Russians invaded, they announced that they were starting an investigation. It seems like they've already that they're issuing indictments. Not really clear what's going to happen, but so this is, unfortunately, this is the reality. I mean, this is the reality about the double standard of the international community. I don't want to I don't want to argue that's not the case. I don't want to, because that just, that's not the case. I mean, as we've seen from the partition resolution, the international community has basically consistently failed the Palestinian people. Again, I'm not telling you guys anything that you don't already know.